Yeah, you're.
So take a seat, everyone. Thank you for being here. And we decided to make it a bit more informal, got rid of the table, so it's more of a circle. Help yourself, there are snacks at the back and also tea on the side. Before we begin, we would just like to make a land acknowledgement first. Leah Manier will do that for us. Finally got your name right.
It's only been 3 years for me. Ana siamna siea Leah Thanasqui Talitsan Ak Kate Tomo. Aitna Squalawan Quanasi Quitsnala Amitsa Coquilum Ak Twelmoch Tamoch Ak Homathquium Malsteoch. Hi, my name is Leah Manier. Welcome to our fellow villagers' land, their unceded traditional territory of the Homathquium peoples. We are their neighbors. My sister and myself come from Kaitsi First Nation, which is about an hour and a bit east of here. Yeah, that's about it. I would like to share a quick song with y'all, because I think it's just a good way to set the tone for the good talks and the good medicine that's going to come from these talks. Yeah, just start us off in a good way for these talks. Fa la la. So, hey, hey, oh, 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 hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, ho, 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 hey, 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 ho, hey, hey. Oh, hey, hey, oh, hey, hey, oh, hey, hey, oh, hey, hey, hey.
Thank you so much for that, Leah. And now we'll have Ron Darvin provide some welcoming remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Leah, for acknowledging the land that we're in today and for setting the tone. I think it's really important, especially with what we're discussing today, right, to recognize that that in these lands that we occupy, many of us as uninvited guests, right, that there are peoples who came before us, and not only that, that there are languages that have been here before, that are woven into the land itself. And what this talk today really is about is being able to acknowledge that and know how to revitalize these languages that are a critical element of the space that we occupy today. So thank you for that. So I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Ron Darvin. I'm the LLED Research Seminar Coordinator. And so I welcome you all to this first research seminar for the year. The research seminar really is intended for us as an LLED community to get to know each other's work. And so we find it very important that for this year we begin especially with the work of amazing students, and also for us to be able to understand what drives us, what we are passionate about, as we meet each other in the hallways, right? What is it that we think about, right? And what drives us in the work that we do. What we try to do with the research seminar this year is that instead of a topic, we've framed it as a question. And this is what we're trying to do in the next few seminars as well. Just so that more than just talking to a topic, for this particular seminar, we talk about how can we revitalize Indigenous languages in ways that are connected to place and space. And while it is an opportunity for our faculty and our graduate students to talk about their work, we thought that by framing it as a question, we can also look at the way our different work would intersect, right? And kind of like help each other kind of like deepen the insights that we gain from the work that we do. So there's many more research seminars coming in the next couple of months. But for this particular research center, we're very grateful to have in the order of those presenting kind of like Cheyenne Cunningham, Jade LaFontaine, Rosalie McDonald, and Leah Manier. And I'll ask them to introduce themselves as they do their talk. They'll have roughly 13 minutes each. And afterwards, we'll have Q&A. So we also want to let you know that we are recording this session, right? So we hope that you're okay with this being recorded, if only so that we can share the kind of discussions that we have for those who can't be here today. But so without further ado, can we start with Cheyenne?
Do you want me to stand over there or?
You can be wherever you want.
Okay.
Just to add to what Ron was saying regarding recording, this room was recently renovated. We spent 1 hour fiddling with all the technology, and we believe we're recording, but we're not entirely sure. So, please bear with us for any technical glitches we may have during the seminar, as the first seminar of the year, as well as the first seminar in a newly renovated room. After millions of dollars, it looks exactly the same.
I was gonna stand over there. Stills. My sister already introduced me, as she always does, but I'll do it myself anyways. Anasya, Nasya, Cheyenne, Sweet, Talit, Sanam, Katie, Namok. My name is Cheyenne. I am from Katie First Nation. I am Coast Salish on my dad's side and English European on my mom's side. We are my sister. We're doing this together, not the same PhD, separate, but together. People have asked us if we are doing it together, and I wish. One day. I already did the land acknowledgement, so I also just wanted to okay, you can do next slide. No, that's just a photo. Okay, so a bit about my research. My proposed research aims to explore Katie First Nation and territorial place names that have been identified in Suttle's Katie ethnographic notes. I seek to document and analyze Indigenous linguistic and relational knowledge embedded within geographic and physical landscapes and revealed through community engagement with land and place. So I want us to look at stories and cultural practices embedded within stories, such as harvesting knowledge. Wait, was there one before this or? Oh. So yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit of context on the Hunkamalum. The term Hunkamalum is a Behavioral term. It's an English term used by linguists to group together several closely related dialects spoken in our lower mainland and southern Vancouver Island, BC. The dialects are divided into 3 subgroups. So Hulkaminam, which is the island dialect, Hunkaminam, downriver, and Halkamalum, which is upriver. So it includes Matsqui to Hill. This is just a map that I included from the website. It represents the, did I say it represented? Just represents the boundaries of Katie territory. So if you see the black, next slide. Okay, this is the map pre-colonization. So for this map, it was created by the Katie community knowledge holders in the Katie Referral Department. Just really long. I think it's a 4x4 map. I actually don't even know where I would do that. I'd love to have it printed and put. So it also highlights some of the so place names shared in the Keatsi ethnographic notes by anthropologist and linguist Wayne Settles.
Oh.
Yeah. The traditional territories of the Keatsi people encompass a vast area known today as Spitzial-Khatsa, which is Pit Lake, Cement, which is Sheridan Hill, Sweet, Fort Hammond, Smuckwoods, Point Roberts, and Elkson, which is Point Grey. In conversation with linguists and through my own research, it has been determined that place names are ancient in Hunkaminam. The reason behind this is that these place names are linked to a different time and space, not to mention an entirely distinct social organization of people, primarily the places that have been altered over time due to infrastructure and colonization. In addition to that, place names are made up of certain lexical suffixes that indicate the topographical shape and may explain the general shape of landscape after the name was given. So the first example that I have here is the Hunkaminam name is Tzeltzelkses, so it's Goose Island. This is just a Google Earth image. The literal breakdown, the Tzeltzel is out on the water or out on the tide flats, and the Kses is word for island. And I just included that because every time we go up to the head of the lake, we pass by it. And also, interesting fact, Keatsi people used to, or it is said that Keatsi people used to stop here on their way up to the head of the lake where they would go hunting if it got too windy on the water, because if it gets too windy, it's very treacherous. And I think even worse in the winter. When we went up there in the, I think it was December or even January, and it was pretty spooky. So yeah. Another fun fact, this island is also known as Penn Island. In 1903, the Department of Interior transferred Goose Island to the Department of Justice for the use of a penitentiary. It opened in 2006 and closed in 2008. I think it was due to 4 people escaping. How they knew that swim, I don't know, but they did. And there's a whole bunch of place names. There's over 100, but I just chose a few because we only have 10 minutes. But yeah, so this one is Salcombe, also known as Yorkson Creek. So this place name I wanted to make mention of because my sister actually taught me that when we're fishing and if we go beyond Yorkson Creek, or if it's beyond Yorkson Creek, we shouldn't go too far in because then your net will get snagged up and it's just, that is not fun. So I kind of use it as a place marker now. And there was a time when we didn't really have a choice because if you go to the next slide, you'll see that there's a lot of fish. So this is my partner and I. This is just down from Yorkson Creek. We didn't go too far in, but we were beyond it. And it's like if you don't pick your net quick enough and you're gonna try to go through the bridge, if your net's out, then you're not gonna, you'll get caught. So this was a close one. We had to pull the net up with the fish in it because we didn't want to get caught or wrapped around the bridge. So it was really heavy, as you can see. I'm trying to use all my body weight to lean back and pull it in. Yeah, so that's kind of something that I have learned that my sister taught me, but as well experiential learning. I'm like, hurry, let's go. And then the last place name that I chose is Salt Sauce, so the head of Pit Lake. This is the summer village listed by Boaz. However, my information does not suggest that it was anything. Oh, that's Settles. I've been told that this was not just a summer camp and that to this day there are still remnants of a village. Archaeological evidence suggests that there were pit villages and that have been located throughout the past year. This is also another favorite place of mine. My family and I go up here to hunt from September to December. Unless we get something early, then we don't have to go in December. But there's also a huge logging company there and other cabin owners who live there permanently. So when we go up there, we have to rent from other cabin owners that reside there all year round. But yeah, we have to pass Goose Island to get up to this village. And that is pretty much it for my presentation. I included this picture of, it's one of my favorite pictures actually. So that's Leah's husband, the one that's like laughing all hysterically, and then the tall fella is my sister's partner, my niece Mia, and then my brother with the bow. So there were so many photos to choose from and so many videos that I could have inserted here, but this is one of my favorite photos. They're just, I don't even remember what they're laughing about, but they're having a really good time, so I wanted to include that. That's it. Are you doing questions at the end, or?
Well, it's reserved for the end.
I have my slides on here. I don't have any notes, so I'm just gonna wing it.
I don't know why I went back to the beginning.
First, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement. Tatea, Chihuahua, Chima, Gunchachesh, Ducktamiu, Humakwiam, Hunkaminum Gun, Hettench Quest, Jade LaFontaine, Puss Bazam, Eaksa, Catherine LaFontaine, Hettench Gaksa, Chief James Hobart, Hettench Giksa, Sheetums, Flo Babwin, Petha, Robinet, Quest, Hettench Gaksa, Sheetums, Jenny Chapman Hobart, Petla, James Hobart Hishquest. Both my grandfather and my dad are both named James Hobart. I just decided to recycle the name. I'm here today as an uninvited guest, or maybe invited, Grace is here, an uninvited guest to Musqueam territory, Hunkaminam speaking Musqueam territory. And my name is Jade LaFontaine. I am from Spuzum First Nation, where my dad is currently the elected chief. And I'm also mixed European ancestry. You can switch to the next slide. So here's some photos of the territory that I come from. You'll see the title of my presentation is Language is Tied to Place, but my place is on fire. When we're talking about place, we cannot separate it from the realities that are happening in those spaces. I'm very fortunate that Spuzum right now is not on fire, and the fires have come quite close and done some damage and definitely given us some scares, but we ourselves have not experienced the wildfires that have happened through our nation, the nation, which is quite long, and our nation has gone through a lot of climate disasters in recent years. We can switch to the next slide. So for context, the place where Spuzum is, some of you might know where Spuzum is. It's a running joke for other communities. I don't know, they'll come up to me, they'll say, oh, you're from Spuzum, oh, I'm so sorry, we're from the Stalo Nation. We used to say, oh, you misbehave, we're dropping you off in Spuzum. What do we do? I don't know. You can see also, you can see Gale's there, and then Spuzum's there. But down there's Hope, and up there's Hell's Gate, so there's this kind of also running joke that Spuzum's halfway between Hope and Hell's Gate. So, Intukatnchin, Thompson River Salish, the anglicized name, is down here in this corner, you can see. It goes down into northern Washington, but it's mostly in the interior of BC, bordering a bunch of different languages. Most notably Squamish-Chain, there's a lot of similarities there with our language. And the Intukatnchin territory has been ravaged by climate disasters. Next slide. So some of you might know about the First Peoples Cultural Council report on the status of BC First Nations languages. This one was from 2022, which I only actually found last year doing a project for Lee's class. Thank you very much. I didn't realize they'd come up with a new one, but as I was reading through it, because I like to compare it to the years before, every 4 years. So for 2018, the numbers were actually lower. So I was like, oh, this is great. Look at this. But then I see only 5 reported communities to us. Oh, what's this? Regarding the low rate of reporting for Intukatnchin, many communities in this area were affected by forest fires and severe flooding during the data collection period, which understandably made it difficult to report.
Respond.
First one?
Yeah, the
Which
first
one's the
one.
first one?
That one? That one, yeah, that one.
I don't know.
That helps.
Shut up.
The laser pointer.
What about we're going next?
I pressed the button. It's not doing anything.
Oh, it just
The laser
points,
pointers.
Oh, it points.
if you
Where?
wanna point to a map or
Ah,
something.
okay, cool. Ta-da.
But I'll still do the.
Next slide, please. So here's some photos from Lytton, BC. Some of you might have heard about this if you're here. They hit record-breaking temperatures in Canada, and the town burned down in 15 minutes. You can switch to the next slide. Here's the remains. It was decimated. I got the privilege of going there last spring, and there's a lot of temporary homes and stuff that are being built. They actually were ravaged by the fires on one side, and then the next year it came and went to the other side. So there's nothing left in Lytton, the Canadian village destroyed by wildfire. Wildfire that decimated BC town was likely human caused. This is because there are reports that the train that runs through the territory gave off sparks and potentially started the fire. Next slide. Then there was floods. Many of you remember the atmospheric river. It wreaked havoc in quite a few areas of our territory, especially Merritt, BC. This is a photo from Merritt after the flood. There's videos of houses being washed away. You can flip to the next slide. Here's another aerial view of what the town looked like. Millions of dollars of damages. And so you can see why the reporting on the status of the languages may have been limited during this time. To the next slide. I awaken at Tamil. I become one with the land. Again, when we're talking about place, talking about language, our languages are inherently tied to the places that they are from. You cannot separate the language from its context. And so for me, my context, as you can see, on fire, flooded, all sorts of things. Well, what can we do about it, right? Well, unfortunately, environmentalism has left Indigenous voices out quite often. And now, like anything any kind of new technology that comes out or new information, people are like, oh my gosh, this is new. And Indigenous people are like, it's not new. We knew this. We've been telling you this. And this is one of those cases where the knowledge that's embedded in our language and in our cultures and our understandings, our worldviews on how to interact with the world, how to steward the land in order to protect it, to create abundance, etc. All of those things are inherent to the language. So when you don't have the language, you don't have this. In reclaiming my language and learning my language, I'm learning about all of these practices, and I'm learning about what we can do to kind of combat these types of, once in a lifetime events that I'm sure will keep happening. So the next slide. How much time am I at?
7 minutes.
7 minutes, okay. Play up, fire. Let me switch to the next slide. So this is pulled directly from Lila June's Architects of Abundance. Just found out about this, incredible work. I'm sure I'll be basing a lot of my PhD stuff on what she's done, but let me just pull some of this stuff for you here. Across the globe, Indigenous nations leveraged frequent low-intensity fire to steward their regional food systems on millennial scales to improve soil condition, increase yield of pro-adapted edible plant species, fireproof areas of settlement, maintain ecosystems balanced, and generate nutrient-dense grasslands that sustained and attracted game animals. This is corroborated by linguistic evidence from the Miami of the Ohio River Valley. In the Miamia lunar calendar, there are 2 moons named for their fire practices. Saskatchewan, the grass burning moon, and Keolia Kinswa, the smoky burning moon. So for example, when we're talking about traditional knowledges and information that's embedded in our languages, like you see in the last slide talking about the moons, and that is only one example. That's just from one example from her paper. There's even more. But for example, low intensity fire, right? So when there's a low intensity burn, an intentionally set burn, it burns the underbrush and it allows for more vegetation, it allows for all the different relations, bugs, plants, birds, animals, everything to thrive more. And then when a high severity burn comes through, there's less to catch fire. And these are things that we were doing for thousands and thousands of years. We have record of this, we can see in the soil. However, there was a ban that was placed on this, and it has definitely, around the world, you've seen how this has, like Australia as an example, California is another example, where separating us from our traditional practices has actually led to more damage, because it turns out we survived for a really long time because we knew what we were doing. Let's go to the next slide. So this is another thing I'd like to pull out that is also informing my research, which is considering land in language and language in land. This is from Ferguson and Weaselboy. Again, Language, while at first glance may seem unrelated to discussions of environmental sustainability, but is deeply central to both Indigenous epistemologies and ontologies, and thus understandings of life on Earth. Language arises from the land just as humans do. In turn, both language and humans are dependent on the land as a spiritual and material source or sustenance. Language reverberates within and throughout land, and thus is intrinsically connected to all beings upon that land. It is not a variable easily separated, as it allows and acknowledges both communion with and understanding of the land. So, 5 minutes. For my community, this is something that I started doing some research into recently to do it for a project. I had to write a literature review on a plant. That's fun. Everybody should do that. This is kukupen, also known as bitterroot. And its flowers are quite beautiful, but that is only one part of it. It is an incredible food source. And we used to go out and harvest it. There's a very small window in spring where you can go and you can harvest it. It was a valuable trading crop for our communities. With some, we didn't have it in Spuzzum. It's more in our northern territories. But there's we have records of trading where a bushel of these would be worth, or like a few bushels of these would be worth like a canoe. So people would come down to Spuzzum. Spuzzum would make canoes and baskets, send them back up, and we'd get bitterroot in exchange. So it was a valuable cash crop, if you want to use those terms. But also it was very nutritious. It was quite nutrient dense. And because of the way that it grows, it's actually a bit fire resistant because it comes up and blooms before fire season starts, and then it quickly goes back down underground and it lays dormant during fire season. However, with earlier and earlier fire seasons, that could be a problem. Something about this that really stood out to me, though, is it took a lot of work to learn about this. It was not easy. I'd heard elders talk about it, and that's what sparked my interest. They'd be like, oh, kupen, it's a chief root. It's like, oh, kukpi, like chief root. It's one of the main food things that's so important to us. But in my language classes that I'm taking through NVIT, I've heard people who are in the class, adult speakers, say, oh yeah, like what is that? I've heard in this audio something about Botany Valley. Botany Valley, I think I remember where that was. We might have gone there when we were kids. There was to harvest something, like what was it called? And I was like, oh, like kupen, bitterroot? And she was like, oh yes, exactly, bitterroot. She lives close to Botany Valley, which is in between like Merritt, Lytton, Ashcroft, like between Lytton and Ashcroft. And this was a place that in our stories and histories we have a lot tied to in terms of how to harvest, when to harvest, the respect that we need to give to the land while we're harvesting. All of this information is in the language, it's in our stories, and people who are here learning the language for the first time, in very close to where these are, don't know what they're called or how to get there. You flip to the next slide. So again, I just want to share some photos of my territory, which I find to be quite beautiful. Don't swim there, you will get carried away. That is the Fraser River. And what I find really beautiful about all of this is that so much of our understandings on how to live sustainably are already there. And while many Indigenous communities, I would say most Indigenous communities, share a lot of similarities when it comes to this understanding of how we're meant to steward the land, our relationship to the land, etc. I find that, I find it in my language as well. And something that stands out to me in our language is like this idea that we traversed like great distances, right? Great distances. We went through canyons and rivers and over mountains, and all that knowledge and all those relationships to the land, and how to respect the land and how to pray before going up a mountain and say, a thanks to each animal that you're going to see in order of the height of the mountain you're going to be when you see them. All these different things that, again, are embedded in the language. So if we want to look at a future that is sustainable, that is, we have armed with knowledge to fight these climate catastrophes, we need to be able to reclaim our ancestral languages and knowledges, and Indigenous people need to be at the forefront of that conversation. Kuchteo.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm going to teach a word. So for switching the slide, I'll say haikwa. Haikwa means go ahead. Haikwa. Okay. Um, Okay. Welcome, everyone, to a great part of my dissertation, sharing through an Indigenous lens of the Wet'suwet'en ways of knowing by teaching through the methodology of storytelling. First, I would like to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory that I am presenting today, the Musqueam people. Hari Sai Makalali Satni, Nito Gana Rosalie McDonald Satni, Galantan Gla, Luxelu any Hapatis at Gla, Girim Den any Hapatzagals at. Hello everyone, my name is Rosalie McDonald. My hereditary chief name is Makalales. I come from the Caribou and the Small Frog clan. My father clan is the Bear clan. And I am from Lake Bebe Nation. I am of Wet'suwet'en, Neduden on my mother's side, and Dakef on my father's side. So I thought I'd just share a language map here from the First Peoples Cultural Council to show my mother's side up from Hazelton to
Rosalie, if you wanna-
Ferns Lake.
You just click on that.
Okay. So right here, Wet'suwet'en. My mother was born and raised here, and so was I. And then my father is from Dakef, which is from Fort St. James. So of carrier descent, but totally different dialects. So the layout of my presentation, I started off with an acknowledgement, and I want to thank you all for just allowing me to share this space with you. I'm going to be touching on storytelling, types of stories, Wet'suwet'en Yedede, which is the old Wet'suwet'en stories, and I've been teaching for 10 years, so I just recently started teaching our language. And so I have been trained in the method of TPRS, which is total physical response through storytelling, which is a really great way to teach my language. And then I'm going to end up with just sharing who the inspirational knowledge holders were in my life and my teaching. Each Aboriginal nation has particular traditions, protocols, and rules concerning stories and the way that stories are to be told for teaching and learning purposes. The purpose is to create space for Indigenous ways of knowing through using the methodology of storytelling. Archibald. The purpose of researching storytelling epistemology and methodology is that I would like to fill the gap between today's relationship between elders and youth by sharing my grandmother's teachings. And here is a picture of my grandmother right here. My grandmother, Marianne Austin, she's my maternal grandmother. The power in stories. Archibald argues that the stories are not just texts or narratives that deal with sequences of events in a linear progression of events. Storytelling is a significant practice that validates the epistemologies of all Indigenous peoples. Stories have meaning and teaches different aspects of morals in life. Storytelling is also an important approach to research among Indigenous scholars, Archibald and Kovac. Stories are passed down from one generation to the next and hold powerful messages and or meaning that teaches a reader or listener in one way or another. Archibald shares that stories are more than just words being shared. They bring words to life. Elders play a huge part in teaching oral stories, and are our knowledge and wisdom holders. A storyteller shares energy and strength to listeners. Storytelling is a source of power that may remind a listener of life experiences that teaches them in a positive way. Archibald talks of restoring heart knowledge through the powerful stories. To remember a story, you must write it in your heart. Their knowledge becomes your knowledge. And here are the ways that I incorporated Joanne Archibald's 7 principles into my ways of knowing through my grandmother's teaching. So I first off respect that connects to oneself and others around you. Responsibility that connects to land. Reciprocity that connects to language. Reverence in which connects to our ancestors' teachings. Holism connects to our spiritual belief. Interrelatedness connects to the relationship of land, animals, and plants. Synergy connects to the passing down of my grandmother's knowledge through storytelling. So the types of stories, oral storytelling as a pedagogical tool for learning life lessons, the process of witnessing and storytelling to honor Indigenous traditions and ancestors, and reflecting on the processes of the ancestors in a modern world, and sharing stories of spirituality as source of strength. Storytelling incorporates a diversity of teaching topics and strategies such as oral, written, visual, and digital storytelling. Okay, all right.
I'll put them like this one.
So here is a example of Wet'suwet and Gedede. It's our old story, and this story connects to the land, the animals, incorporates our spirituality, and teaches them through morals of what is going on. So actually my uncle Ron Austin Sr. is who translated this story, which was first told by my late grandmother Marianne Austin. And this book was illustrated by Carmen Koala Redante. She's actually married to my cousin now. So it's a beautiful book. They created so many beautiful books in our language. So the way that I incorporate TPR is I introduce about 3 to 4 new vocabulary words per lesson. And I work on, okay, we need to pronounce, you need to know the meaning, and we act it out. So for example, skakyas, children, skakyas. You can use 2 gestures, and gadi, or you can just point to the picture. Gadi means ants. Next, what's up? Miklan, what's up? Look at the spider. Miklan, what's up? Bidanzan. What is who are they? Who are they? And then they'll repeat children, skakyas. So I incorporate those, and then we get into sentences. Oh. Okay. So the second part of how I incorporate our language into the storytelling is, okay, they know the words, and we're going to start sentences. So now we're going to read the sentences. Ska was adeha ada. So the children were running for their lives. What's up? It me. Annie, the spider said, come here. Gadi, what's up? Skak, habetya. The ants went over their way, and the spider saved the children. So just parts, the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story. And then at the ending, and when the students are capable of pronouncing and recognizing, understanding, all the words. We're fully reading the story. And he gedede yin kak hane is ha'on zan. The moral of the story is all the little creatures have a purpose in life. So at the beginning, the children were laughing at the spider and they kicked the spider. And so the ants got mad and they started to chase the children. And then once they were in the forest, they were surrounded and the spider ended up saving the children. So that was the full story in context. Storytelling, Story is a basic foundation of all human learning and teaching. Story is a practice in Indigenous cultures that sustains communities, validates experiences and epistemologies, expresses experiences of Indigenous peoples, and nurtures relationships and the sharing of knowledge. Storytelling is also a central focus of Indigenous epistemologies, pedagogies, and research approaches. Excerpts from discussions by Métis Elder, whose stories and histories are shared, suggest a complex mindfulness and require deep respect and research. Storytelling as the potential of the power in story to heal the emotions and spirit. An important part is being able to share the traditional stories to keep them alive and pass on the knowledge, tools, and skills to help in life. I had a chance to connect with Dr. Lorna Williams, and she said language, aligning traditional knowledge to current times, reconnecting with traditional knowledge, undoing English versions of stories, social structures, and concentrating on social structures and family structures. Okay, so my knowledge holders very dear to me, who have taught me everything that I know and still teaching. Of course, my parents, my grandparents, and important to me to learn so that I can pass this knowledge down to my children, grandchildren, and future generations. Many teachings and knowledge are passed down through storytelling when it comes to revitalizing the Wet'suwet'en and language and ways of knowing. So my oldest uncle here, Frank Austin, Uncle Ron Austin, who translated the story. And here is my mother, Dr. Louise Lessert. And those are her siblings. Thank you.
Too much and I can kind of get in track. Hi, Smile. My name is Leah. I already introduced myself. This was interesting for me, and it took grad studies, believe it or not, for me to actually sit and marinate and reflect on how I do, why I do, and how my language revitalization journey is so connected to place and space. So my research, and I know it feels like a dirty word, but my study for language revitalization, I'm currently a teacher. I've been a teacher from the age of 17, or since the age of 17. Cheyenne was one of my first students. I've been fortunate enough to teach generations of my people. But in order to learn more than just basic sentences and just words, unfortunately, in the absence of fluent speakers in my communities, I had to come to university and learn from linguists. Nobody ever became fluent learning through linguistics, put it that way. I happened upon story work. It was a discourse and narrative class in grad studies, and it made me think about how I've learned and taught my whole life. Because when you're so caught up in the doing, you don't often poke your head up to say, oh, this is how I do it. And it's through conversations with my peers and, conversations with my professors that really had me look inside to say, well, how can I explain this? And how can I use this as a tool in my toolbox of language teaching skills to help with language revitalization? I think so far so good. I've successfully taught a cohort that graduated at SFU in the Indigenous Language Proficiency Program with their certificate, which is full-time for a year, and then they went on to their diploma. I was one of 3 teachers. And I taught through story work, not like Joanne Archibald's story work, but the creation of story work, specifically in relation to traditional ecological knowledge, because that's where my interests lie. I think as Indigenous people, we're all colonized to a certain extent, and we're all in various stages of decolonizing ourselves and reclaiming not just our language, but our culture, which is so closely tied to our language. So one comes with the other. I'm specifically interested in traditional ecological and cultural knowledges of my people, because they're my people. But I've had the blessing and been fortunate to teach many nations. Almost all of people in my cohort were representative of all downriver speaking nations of Hunkaminam, with the exception of one. And we had 3 teachers from 3 of our different nations. And we were able to accomplish this because we taught online. We started during COVID. It eliminated the barrier of transportation. Had I taught through story work before this cohort started in 2020? No, I had not. So I had to hit the ground running. I had taught unofficially through story work. I'm a fisherman also. It's natural for me to share stories of my own experiences fishing with my children, with my sisters, with my peers. That's how I learned, was through stories. That's how I learned, Cheyenne highlighted earlier, about the dangers that the water can pose. That's how I learn about the ecological knowledge that maybe isn't common knowledge to others, but it's common knowledge to me because I'm a fisherman. When the ocean gulls are in our part of the Fraser River, the ulikin are plentiful. When a certain berry or plant is growing, then I know the spring salmon are plentiful. I think it's a terrible shame to learn language in the absence of fluent speakers. So I wanted to address that. I don't want current and future generations, not just my people, but others to have to work so hard in the reclamation of their language and their culture. So I wanted to create a way, if you're not fortunate enough to have elders and knowledge keepers and language keepers, where else can you source this information? Where else can you bridge the gap? And where else can you see yourself reflected in literature? So that began the journey of my story work, my creation of stories about my own traditional ecological knowledge. I was really able to amp it up during COVID. I kept my 5 kids home, first by force, then by choice. I don't know why I did it, but I did it. But it was just us, and there wasn't any interruptions of school or anything else, and we were able to be out on land. Unfortunately, that's not realistic normally. As parents, you both have to work. You don't get as much time with your children. They don't get as much time with grandparents, and they don't get those interactions that I was fortunate enough to have growing up, to have those exchanges of knowledge and sharing. And so I thought, how can we do this in a way that they can always access it and they don't have to pin it on the availability of a person? So that's how my stories were born. And I can't speak about this unless I speak about my reasons, my what brought me here today, those that came before me, and those that will come after me, and a little bit of the process. So I've made an iMovie, and it doesn't have any sound, but it starts with as far back as I could go, with our great grandfather Coquitlam Williams, who actually Coquitlam was named after. He was the last commercial fisherman of Sturgeon. We come from a you started. We come from a long line of fishing peoples. I believe that we were able to retain that knowledge because our grandfather disenfranchised. And he sold his status number so that he could be a commercial fisherman, because you weren't able to be a commercial fisherman if you were a status Indian. That canoe, she made that canoe. This is our great granny, Elizabeth. This is our grandfather, William. Where all the snaps come from. I've left out, for cultural reasons, I've left out pictures of my father. This was the last fluent speaker of our dialect that I was fortunate enough to work with. That was my grandfather's sister. This is going really fast. These were my original reasons. My very first students, my sisters. These are my own children, and these are my reasons now. But I consider all the kids in my community my reasons. I've been a community teacher for a very long time, and I've only recently stopped teaching language within the community. Cheyenne and my other people in my family tend to sneak pictures of me when I'm not aware that they are. I think what this has shown, this is our very first cohort. With story work, I've been able to share what I know, traditional knowledge with my students, help them to create their own stories about, they have the choice. We do language on the land in the summer. They have the choice of tying their story work to something that they've learned in class, which I've taught them, some form of traditional knowledge, or they can write their stories about their own traditional knowledge specific to their territory. I don't like to keep them in boxes. I want all of my students to feel like it's added value for them as language teachers to be able to have something from class to take away. This is also how I've approached my own education. It was language that brought me to university, so it doesn't get put to the back burner as I continue on this journey. Every class that I've approached has to be added value for me in the sense that I have to have some form of resource or teaching that I can take from the coursework that I've done and turn it around and flip it into my own classroom. I've done that by creating stories. The story that started it all, I did not write the story, but I did illustrate it, my chicken scratch. I once discovered, this was the one I wrote for my master's, which really kind of blew up from there, and it really opened my eyes. And the reason why I wrote this story for my master's was because I had just recently learned the traditional knowledge of working stinging nettle fibers into twine, and you can make nets with it, and all the great wonderful things. And we hosted workshops with, I was creating curriculum, language curriculum for, and we were doing it workshop style. And so I wrote the story, but then I realized, can you just pause for a second? Mm-hmm. Drawing pictures, because I'm too much of a perfectionist, it didn't fit within the time frame of the term. So I needed to find a creative way to, how can I illustrate these? And because I'm not a speedy artist. And in order to do this, I could go and look online, but you always have to ask permission, and it doesn't necessarily fit the context and the story that you're trying to, and the messages you're trying to convey. But I looked at all of the pictures I took during COVID of all of the harvesting adventures we had taken. And a lot of it was with learning with other people, but I was poring over books and like, I know where people did this, but how did they do it? So it was lots of experiential learning out on the land, and then later adding the language to it to create lessons to offer to my class. This one was born from one of our classes. These are my pictures. I've got a free comic app, ran it through, took a picture of it. I wanted it the theme to be the same as my original hand-drawn pictures. I put it on my iPad. I took my pencil and chicken scratched and put some cedar capes in to try to make them connected so I can continue on with the adventures of Tatamia, which was an original character from a Catesy story that was told. Actually, one of only 4 stories published and readily available in the public domain of our nation. We were harvesting clams that day, and we're on the flats. I saw all kinds of things. I didn't include all the pictures because there's a few stories. My husband liked this. I gave him a 6-pack. He feels traditional ecological knowledge. So the seagulls that I mentioned, this is the little, they call them candlefish, sweetwa. They're plentiful you can hear them, and the sea lions are plentiful in our part of the river when they're plentiful in end of March, April into the beginning of May is when we harvest those. This story my sister and I wrote together. Cheyenne, I've repurposed some pictures because I'm not about like creating more work for myself, and I just changed what was in her hand. She had a sweet one in her hand. This was the other berry harvesting when salmon berries, litla, are come out, and when we see them, we know that the stockwe, the spring salmon, are plentiful in the river. These are the things that I know because I'm a fisherman. How do people learn these things, specifically Katzie people learn these things, if they don't have fisher people in their family anymore? I think it's their right to know these things, and so that's why I want to document and create stories about this ecological knowledge. This one has no language to it, but it's the process. It was environmental literacy, and I can't remember it was about repurposing something that you didn't typically use before. I never used the fish skin. I just didn't. But I learned how to make fish leather. But how do you speak about the fish leather if you don't speak about what else you do with the flesh of the fish? So then I had to speak about the smoking of the fish, and then I had to speak about the fishing of the fish. And so it became what I thought was just gonna be a very simple project. And then my prof threw it out there, and he was like, wouldn't it be great if your story was on like recycled paper? And I was like, okay. So I was like, okay, recycled paper. My old MA draft. I have a ton of them. Okay, I don't know how to make paper, but I'm sure there's a YouTube video out there. So I'm just go full steam ahead. Made the paper, printed it on there. I had to learn how to bookbind. You can't just willy-nilly. I didn't bring it today, but I found the book. It's just ended up being a little book like this because what I thought was an 8.5 by 11 making paper screen ended up being a 4x6. So I was like, okay, whatever, I'll work with it. And then I covered the front and back with the fish leather that I had fished for. I had tea tanned and oiled. And yeah, it's a family process. So my children, they're so willing to come on many adventures and learn all the things most of the time. Sometimes in teenage years it gets a little difficult, but my students, so eager and so appreciative of the knowledge exchange and the traditions that we exchange and share through stories in our class. So that's how I tie my language revitalization journey, and I will continue to tie in the future my language revitalization efforts to story work, place, and space.
Thank you so much, Leah. And can we invite our speakers to sit in the circle with us as we open the floor up for questions and answers?
Okay.
Thank you so much, Cheyenne, Jade, Rosalie, and Leah for sharing your stories and sharing your research. It's the point where we open the floor for anyone who would like to respond, ask questions.
Thank you very much for an amazing presentation. So many wonderful connections amongst those presentations. I was just thinking about the central question that you began with, or all of you addressed, which is how do we revitalize Indigenous languages in ways that are connected to place, space, and which you all did in unique and interesting ways. I guess I'm wondering about the relationship between place and time. space and time, and to what extent time is also part of the process of thinking about place and space. And some of you made some reference to time as well within your frameworks, but I just wondered if you thought about that as well, or and in what ways perhaps?
I have thought about time, but time is in like the seasonal round, the seasonal calendar, and stories linked to that is like the pie in the sky end goal. That being said, I need to sit with so many people because I'll be the first to say I'm not an expert and I still have so much more to learn that no institution can teach me. And most of the knowledge our knowledge keepers hold, but a lot of practices have fallen out of practice. So it's, and then also global warming has changed the times that we harvest things. So it's, how do you teach children and or adults to become more aware of the world around them? Not just what they see, but what they smell. I can smell the fish in the river. I can hear the birds before I ever see the birds. And that tells me certain fish are there. So how do you get people who are so caught up in the go, go, go lifestyle of doing to really stop and take stock of the world around them? What do I see? What do I feel? What do I hear? You know, our place-based literacies class that Melanie and Iris taught, another student had asked that, and I was like, geez, I don't know. And I'd never thought about it until that moment. How do I do it? And now I take that practice and I actually do it with my own students. Okay, get it from your computer. Let's not sit at a desk, but get outside. And then understanding that time is very tied to colonial constraints, and it doesn't always work for Indigenous knowledge or to share Indigenous knowledge. I find it very restricting, and it's very hard to give timelines. When do you harvest this? Well, you know, it depends. If it rained a lot, well, is it going to be sunny? Well, I mean, if I could tell the future, I could tell you that, but I don't know. I'm particularly interested about the different winds at the different times of year. So there's going to be a story that's going to be about Wren and the winds in some point in time, because as Shannon mentioned, at different times of year, in the heart of our territory, this lake, it's the only tidal lake in BC, it changes drastically depending on the winds. But there's other factors in there. So time is in time of year, but not time is in
Chronology.
Can I add to that also? So for one, I think about like ecological knowledge tied to time, right? I remember in Hunkamina being like, oh, well, it'll be like the time when like the fish are here, or, you know, the salmon berries are blooming. And in our community, for example, with bitterroot, it's not like from May 2nd to it's, okay, well, it's before they bloom, and you have to go before they bloom. If you've bloomed, you're too late. And so you keep an eye out, you're like, oh, is it time, right? So if you say like, well, the bitterroot has bloomed, it's like, well, we know where we are in the season, right? So that's interesting when we think about time. But also when we think about time in like, if we're thinking about it like place, so much of our knowledges go back so far. And so some people might think, oh, well, that was so long ago. Like, how can they be relevant now, for example? But the land has changed, but like probably not as much as like people have changed. And if we can get back to that or change, you know, after wildfires, for example, environmentalists will come in and they'll go, well, we have to put it back to the norm that it just was. What was there before? And they go and they replant all the stuff that burned down in the first place. When they should be asking, well, what was there before that? Because so much of BC's like environment has been changed first by Indigenous people and then by people who came afterwards, cattle farming, planting of trees because they thought it was too sparse. So they planted trees in the desert, which is why Lytton's on fire, right? And it's so interesting to think about that timing, right? And if we could go back just a few more steps to, you know, yellow avalanche lily or something, planting that in areas that had sagebrush before and looking at how the deers can eat that and how we can move through those spaces. It's so interesting when you think about time in that way, for sure.
Thank you.
Really good question. When I think about time, I think about the seasons, and Like we've got so much similarities and yet our languages are different, but it all underlies with science, with the plants, and specifically like for our carrier people, you know, we look at the fireweed plant, and when they bloom late in August, that tells us, okay, the moose are ready to harvest and things like that. And that's, the things that I've learned. And, so many teachings, like I'm a really big harvester as well. I harvest my fish, my moose, and berries and medicine, and even the medicine, there's different signs out there that tells us and what, our ancestors have learned and teaching us. And it would be, yeah, that's definitely important, and I would like to incorporate that into touching on land-based knowledge within my dissertation. I'm only in my first year, so in my second term, so I'm like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm gonna do. Oh, maybe I'll do that, or yeah, thank you.
I was just thinking about the same thing about the seasonal rounds and thinking about harvesting. I'm brand new to harvesting, and we started going on walks, and Leah has to go back earlier because she has to get her kids ready for school, but my niece and I, we continue on. Anyway, she was picking cottonwood buds, and she took a picture and she's like, oh look, we should get ready to harvest. And she's like, oh, maybe not, because like when she squished them, they were still a little too juicy, I think you said. And
You want them juicy, but you don't. There's too much rain right now, so they could potentially mold before they dry
but
out.
I feel like the rain had brought them out much sooner than they should have been, because I think last year we didn't harvest until April, so I thought that was interesting. What you guys said.
Thank you very much.
You can't keep me from my first time on UBC. I was looking at the grasses in the center of the walking path, and I'm like, you know what I could do with those? Crawl into the pond, like cattail, stay out of the water. I guess. But how do you teach that? First step.
I have a question. I mean, we can see how storytelling is such an important part of being able to revitalize languages. But I can see from the picture books that you've created, for instance, and the picture books that you've shared, Rosalie, as well. Like, I'm curious to know kind of like in terms of whether it's your creative process, right? And you touched on this a bit, but are there any kind of particular principles that you think of when it comes to representing kind of Indigenous knowledge through images, and especially as you think of it as a way to talk about language, right? And for instance, in the picture books that your uncle made, it's Rosalie, like, is there something in particular, do you think, that we should be able to understand about how images are chosen or created to represent these realities?
I'd love to say I have a clear process of how I go about it. Mostly it's frantic. No. When I'm drawing, I feel like it's a little frantic. Like, I actually never know what I'm going to draw. And after I draw, this sounds really weird, but after I draw the picture, because I know the story, I've written the story, but after I draw the picture, I fit it to the scene. So I don't fit the words to the picture, I fit what I've drawn, if I'm drawing it, and then I fit it to the scene. I don't know if that's other people's process. My own pictures, the stories, I mean, unfortunately, because I'm not a fluent speaker, are all written in English. One day, when I get lots of time, and it's gonna take me forever, I have to sit and translate all of them, but I just pull from the pictures that I've taken for the day. If it doesn't reflect what I'm trying to say, so like there's one instance where I showed a picture of seagulls. Well, I really needed them to be seagulls. They weren't seagulls. They were actually hell divers, a different bird altogether. but I just made them seagulls for my story. Colored over them. And because I needed them to reflect that the seagulls are here when the sweetwater are here, when the little fish are here. So, I mean, I take creative liberties with my own pictures in that sense to make them fit, but still the same idea, making my pictures fit my story. Never the other way around. Did that answer your question?
For sure.
For the storybook that I shared, we're just getting into making the creation stories, so it has to be illustrated. And the illustrator that helped with this book was just amazing and very talented. But in other regards, I've just been using my own real life pictures, going out into the land and taking pictures of, you know, the trees, the plants, the what have you, even on our hunts with hunting moose and bears, and yeah, so I try to take just respectful, you know, like from a distance, and I don't like, you know, get right into the gutting and all that. I try to think, you know, of all the protocols and ethics around not only spirituality, but respect. And there's only so much, right? You could, and most of the time you're just orally, you know, talking about one picture that's leading you off. So that's, yeah, there is limits for sure. Even when it comes to our ceremonies, we can't be taking pictures of certain things in a potlatch hall. They're just so sacred. Like the rattle, for instance, in our potlatch hall, we cannot record it. We can't take pictures because that's like our Canadian anthem. It starts us off, and nobody's allowed to, you know, do certain things. So there's limits.
Can I add some observations to that also? When you were talking about total physical response, something you mentioned, this is something I thought about because I worked with Gonawage for my master's degree, and they were talking about how their transition to online learning because of the pandemic, they were struggling because all of the interfaces that they were using were in English, and they're trying to teach immersion language. Pictures are a good way to get around that. So like, for example, like, you know, in total physical response, you're not supposed to say English, right? Like you're like at a point. You said sometimes you point to the picture, right? So that adds context clues. But then also, because so many of us are not in our community, we're here and we're working, trying to help our communities or, you know, urban Indigenous communities with lots, you might not be able to go to that specific place to tell the story, but maybe you can take a picture and come back and tell the story, and it gives people another understanding, like listeners, another understanding of, you know, the relationships between the things that are happening in the stories. Most people in Spasm do not know who I am, and that sucks. But I grew up in areas where I couldn't get to Spasm, and I reconnected with my identity as I got older in my 20s. And I don't know how to drive. I'm learning. I just got my L, so hopefully I can drive out there and actually introduce myself to people. But I'd say I'm from Spasm because that's where my ancestors are from, right? Like my dad is chief. My grandmother was there. My family they went to residential school. My great aunt passed away in Kamloops residential school. We found out recently that my great uncle likely never made it home, so he could be one of the 215. And I have all these connections to this area, right? But the people there now don't know who I am. And when it comes to hurdles, this hasn't come up. But I always have this fear of, well, I'd say, well, I'm from Spasm because that's where I'm from. And having someone go, well, I don't know who you are. You're speaking for us? Like, who are you? And so that's always a fear for me because even though I don't know the people there yet, I still want to help the community because that's where my people are from. And so it's just interesting to think about those dynamics.
And I have to be honest, I live in community and I've lived in community since I was 7. I still have that fear. I don't represent Catesy as a nation as a whole. I am Leah from Catesy. That's it. But yeah, that fear is there. What do you mean? You met so-and-so and she's speaking about Casey? She's, no, just one person, or two people.
Well, super.
I just have one quick question. Since you mentioned, Lee, about decolonizing kind of knowledge, right, as part of the work that you do, I'm curious to know what it means to do this work for all of you, to go into kind of like an academic institution where you're expected to share knowledge through certain academic genres, right? Whether it's your dissertation later on or journal articles, right? That are very colonial, right? In the way it is structured. Like, how have you, or how you think it can resist, kind of like find spaces of resistance in terms of representing this knowledge in an academic institution?
Can I speak to that first?
Sure.
So one is in terms of knowledge dissemination and also research methodology. I'm sure you all have had to at some point push back against the institution. Example I've used was in my master's, I got a grant to compensate the teachers I was working with in Ganawage. I wanted to give each teacher a $40 gift card for school supplies from a shop in Ganawage, and the review board told me that that was coercion. It was too much money. And I was like, $40 for school supplies per teacher is too much. And they were like, you can do 20, like maybe 25. And I was like, I have a grant for this, and I'm sorry, I'm not budging. Like, I don't care if you're the ethics review board. This is it. Like, I'm sorry, right? And so you have to deal with that. But then also, like you said, sharing your information in this like new academic way. Sometimes I've heard elders refer to it as like, oh, you're arming yourself with the white man's tools, which can be seen as either a bad thing, as like, oh, you're settling, you're doing it their way, or a good thing, as in, well, now you're speaking their language, right? You're a word warrior, and you're able to actually meet them and say, well, actually, this is using your own information, using your science. Look at how I've demonstrated all these things that I know to be true, which I find so interesting. And also, when it comes to language, I kept kind of like dismissing literacy for a while there because I was like, reading and writing were oral languages. And then I talked to my mentor, Patshaw, and she was like, no, you don't understand. Literacy now is important. She was like, it's annoying that it has to be important, but it is something that we should be teaching because it's something that's going to empower this generation, and they're going to be glad they had it. So.
I can't remember the question. I was so enthralled with what you were saying. Could you repeat the question?
How do you think can you resist kind of like specific ways of reporting knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, in very academic genres that are colonial in nature?
I think for me, it's about the process. Like, I think historically, specific to the work that I will do, after I get through comps, it historically was very extractive. And I have a kind of a mixed relationship with the information that has been extracted from my people and documented about my people. But the other flip side of it is if it wasn't documented, I wouldn't have had linguistic material to pore over, to learn from. That being said, I will not be conducting the work that I do with my people that way. And I will probably have a higher standard than any ethics will ever have with the exchange and the back and forth that I'll have with my knowledge keepers about ensuring that A, reflecting truly what it is that they're saying in the work that we do together, and B, doing it in a good way that where I'm getting the clearance to share the things that are okay to share. Everything they share with me is not, I know it's not for public consumption. So I'm very mindful of that. So I anticipate that being multiple exchanges, not just like a one or two and done. It's going to be a process, and I'm looking forward to it. I feel like I'm always resistant. You know, many conversations, she's like, you just have to do it. And I'm like, but why does we have to do it this way? Why? Because it's always been done this way? Why can't we change it? And we had this conversation initially in our masters, and she's like, she's always known she wanted to do a PhD. And I said, that's great. I love you. I support you from afar. I'm done after this. And she said, but I just don't know what I want to do it on. I said, do it on whatever the heck you want to do it on. And she's like, you can't just do that. I said, yeah, you can. I had no idea if you could or you couldn't, but I was going to stick to the claim that absolutely, yes, you can. You just do it on whatever you want to do it on, and you'll find somebody to support you in that, and it'll be great. And well, so far so good. But I think for me, because I'm specifically interested in traditional ecological and cultural knowledge, but it's closely linked to science. And it's not a very old, it hasn't been around that long, so to speak, but Indigenous practices have been, and Indigenous knowledge has been around since time immemorial. And I always get hung up on the fact that I have to justify the things that I'm saying by what's written in the scientific literature. And I'm like, this rubs me the wrong way, and I don't know how I'm going to approach that as I come to writing about it. Like, I know it's important to write it in a certain way, but yeah, cross that bridge when I get to
Really
it.
quick addition, because you just reminded me of something. I was watching a video about like how like Haida New Channel are working with like how they're going to harvest sea otters. And there's this video on the Coastal Voices website that's got like really amazing people in it. And they're all talking about the importance of this. And one person, I believe they're non-Indigenous, not that that matters, but they say, oh, it's important that we think about this like Indigenous ecological knowledge, because like otherwise, like, we'll go back to being in the Dark Ages in terms of our understanding of knowledges. So I Googled when the Dark Ages was, just 2,500 years ago. Our knowledges go way beyond that. So it's so interesting to think the Dark Ages are like this thing in history of like, oh my gosh, the Dark Ages, 2,500 years ago. Meanwhile, we have stuff that dates back 9,000 years, like, at least here. It's just so interesting to see that comparison. But I digress.
Awesome, okay. Decolonization, for me, it is the inspiration of all the Indigenous scholars out there and indigenizing, our ways of knowing, implementing, an Indigenous research paradigm where we can adapt it and take it into our own ways. Like I showed you earlier, Joanne Archibald's 7 principles, yes, that was hers, but I borrowed it and I used it in my own culture, my own language and traditions. And so I'm just so inspired by all the Indigenous scholars who are making way for us. And, the word literacy being in a language and literacy program, I've read just the other day, wasn't, a thing until 50 years ago, and now there's different types of literacy. There's, instead of like art, mathematical, computer literacy, now there's eco literacy, environmental literacy. There's, now what about Indigenous literacy? So, yeah, my mind is just so open. I get a lot of feedback from my mother. She holds a PhD and she just stresses how lucky you are. She says I'm lucky because in her days, she had to indigenize the courses that she's gone through. She didn't have this opportunity. So I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Just to add on to what you're saying, my partner always says, you're so lucky, because when he was doing his master's, he didn't have I guess the internet just came out or something. He's 6 years older than me, and he's like, we had to handwrite everything, and we didn't have as many Indigenous resources or classes or anything like that. And I was like, all right, well, thank you for that pep talk. But also, our existence is the resistance here in these institutions. Historically, these institutions were not made for us. We weren't allowed to be here unless we disenfranchised. And yeah, the future is Indigenous, and we can see that happening in real time now with Jan. Right here.
Ron, can I say something?
Yeah.
Just to add sort of a personal reflection on this thing about colonial frameworks or structures, I've had these little moments in helping to prepare this that have sort of changed my thinking. Because Ron and I had certain assumptions like, okay, we're gonna have tables, we're gonna have chairs behind the tables, and then I asked the presenters, well, how would you like the setup be? And then a circle without any tables. Why even have tables? Same thing we asked for, like send all your presentations in PDF or PowerPoint because we're going to concatenate them and they'll all be in one file. And then Leah's like, oh, but I made a video. And I said, oh yeah, of course. We don't have to have all the same format just for our convenience. And then the whole time thing with the 5 minutes remaining, 2 minutes remaining, you were talking about sort of the non-linearity of time. And I felt a little bit uncomfortable showing these little and, you know, I think that, you know, I welcome more pushback because I don't even consider these details sometimes, and it's helpful to be on to have our minds and thoughts change. And you know, at the beginning, we could make a disclaimer saying like, well, each talk will be approximately 10 minutes or 13 minutes, but if someone else speaks less, the other person can speak more, and you know, if you have to go, that's fine. You know, I think we as an institution and as students and faculty, etc., have to look at research sharing, information sharing and dissemination, and in a more flexible way. And I really want to thank you guys for accepting the invitation, and in Leah's case, proposing her participation, particularly because these spaces and these events can sometimes be uncomfortable, can be nerve-wracking. You don't know how formal or informal it will be, and also you're all at different stages of your work, and some of you just beginning. So that's one thing that Ron and I discussed, that we want this research seminar series not to be like, you have an amazing work of research, you've worked on 4 years of it, and you're presenting the final product, and it's going to be formal like a conference style. No, it can be at any stage, and we can just discuss, share ideas. It could be any of these presentations could spark ideas for future research. So thank you for your bravery, and really appreciate it.
It's so interesting you talk about that, because like we think about like colonial ways of knowing and being, and you know, sometimes like decolonization gets thrown around. I really like centering Indigenous knowledges, and I also like the idea of like things are not binary, right? So someone might be like, oh, well, Indigenous knowledges are better or good and colonial are bad, but really they're out of balance, right? So in these spaces, like what we can do, like what you're saying here, is like by centering Indigenous knowledges, by maybe de-centering colonial ways of knowing and being, it changes the experience of people who are attending, it changes your perspectives, provides new worldviews, and I think that having that balance is really important.
Sure.
On behalf of the department, we would like to thank you again. We'd also like to thank Efiam, who's been helping us with kind of like all the facilities that are recorded. Efiam, and also Megan. So thank you all for coming, and have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Masaru.
Can I also take a moment to thank Firth, because it's his very first job and he's done this amazing job.
It was just, I wanted to see if it was okay, but it's not.
I know. If it's not an introduction,
I was working. Oh, yeah, nice to meet you. I was like, yeah.